For some teachers, the next session may pose particular challenges. Because a high percentage of people have been sexually abused as children, it may raise uncomfortable feelings or memories. Bear in mind that some of your students may have been or are being sexually abused. They need to know that sexual abuse is never a child's fault and that there is help available. You can help by letting them hear these crucial messages. If a guest speaker, such as the police, has presented to your class, it's still important to include this session. Police generally focus on street safety. We focus on the 90% of abuses that happen to children by someone they know. It's important to be aware of the Child Protection Act, which requires anyone to report suspected abuse. Also, become familiar with your school's policy around disclosure.
This section may be a little hard for some teachers, especially if you were sexually abused or you know someone who was. There are sensational sexual abuse stories in the news all the time, but everyday abuse is not really talked about that much. I think that's the reason why there's so many misconceptions about sexual abuse. It is important to know some things like the offender could be male or female and has the child's confidence. That sexual abuse can go on for a long time. The child often feels confused or guilty. And there are still adults who don't believe children when they disclose. When a child discloses, the person to whom they tell their story needs to give the child some very specific messages. I believe you. It's not your fault. It's good that you told me. I'm going to help you. Sometimes there's a big news item and the story goes on for days. They may talk about a single pedophile who was charged with offenses dating way back. Or it might be about predators who use the internet to lure children, to meet them, to force them to expose themselves. When children hear these stories, they become fearful. That's the reason why this class is crucial, and that's why I hope you're going to do it. Because it will help the children distinguish between manipulation and consent, between different kinds of touches. We encourage them to disclose and to get help if they get abused. And I hope that you will also see the importance of nurturing touch. We present different ways of dealing with the issue of sexual abuse. Use what you're most comfortable with. For example, I tell two stories, one about a principal. The other story that I tell is about a girl. Of course, as you're well aware, it also happens to boys. With boys, especially when there's a male offender, aside from the heavy burden of carrying around a secret and feeling guilty, some boys wonder about their sexual orientation. They also may have an additional worry. They may worry about becoming offenders themselves. We encourage you to go to the resource section and read more about sexual abuse. Okay, this is the class where we talk about what it means to say yes. Well, a fancy word for that is consent. And when adults do sexual things with each other, first they always need to find out if they both want to. The problem is that sometimes older people will trick younger people into doing sexual things and they pretend that you have given permission. But you know what? Kids can't give permission to do sexual things when they're too young. I don't know if you've ever heard of people who go on the internet, adults who go on the internet, and they pretend they're kids so they can get the kids to meet with them and do sexual stuff. And that's the reason why you always hear people say, don't give out personal information when you're on the net, right? And that's not so hard to understand. But sometimes sexual stuff can happen with someone you know, and that's the stuff that's harder to figure out. So in order to try and make this as clear as I can, first we're going to talk about touches, okay? The first kind of touches that we're going to talk about are the touches that we really like to get, the ones that make us feel good. So what kind of touches would that be? Yeah, right, okay. And who do you get them from? Yeah, okay, adult at home, teacher, okay. So that's easy, we get that. Then there are touches that don't make us feel good at all. They might hurt, okay? And what kind of touches are those? Yeah, and sometimes you get those kind of touches from, exactly, the same people that you get the good touches from. By the way, you know, if an adult hurts you, you can tell me about it, because there's a really big difference between discipline and abuse. Okay, now we come to the kind of confusing part. It's the confusing touches where it's hard to know whether or not it's okay or not okay. Like someone might be tickling you, right? And they're tickling you so hard you're sort of gasping for breath. Well, what if somebody tickles you and they tickle you near your genitals? Then it's kind of confusing. They make a game out of it, but you don't really know if it's okay or not. When someone takes advantage of a child, someone older, they would trick them into doing stuff, or they would bully them into doing stuff. And the stuff that they would do would be very confusing and make a kid feel uncomfortable. Now, it's not always an adult. It could be someone who's closer to your age. But I'm going to give you the example of what happens with an adult, okay? And to do that, I'm going to tell you a story. In fact, I'm even going to get the storytelling chair. Okay, can everyone see me okay? All right. This is the story about Jenny. Jenny lived with her mom. She was about your age. And it was just the two of them because Jenny's dad had moved out quite a while before. Jenny and her mom generally got along okay. They didn't fight too much. But you know what? Jenny's mom was kind of lonely at times, and so she would go out with her friends and hope she would meet someone. Well, one night she did. She met Frank. And she really liked him straight off. He was funny, and he was really, I don't know, friendly. And he liked kids, so that was a big selling point because, of course, she really cared so much about Jenny and wanted anyone she went out with to like kids too. So they started going out. They saw a lot of each other, and eventually he started coming over and staying the night. So the first night that happened, in the morning, Jenny met Frank over the breakfast table. They got along great, so Jenny's mom was quite relieved. She was worried about it. Well, eventually he would spend just about all his time there. He was practically living there. And he felt free with Jenny's mom, so he could tell her his problems. And one day he had a big one because he lost his job. And he said, you know, I'm having trouble paying my rent. So she said, well, look, you're practically living here anyway. You might as well just move in. He said, great, that's so great. And it means I get to spend more time with Jenny. Well, this was good for Jenny's mom because she worked shifts at the hospital. And because she worked shifts, it meant that sometimes Jenny had to come home by herself after school, and she didn't like that. So she had Jenny in the after-school program. That helped a little bit, but the problem was that Jenny didn't like the program. Anyway, this way, Frank would come and pick her up after school. So he started picking her up, and then they would walk home, or sometimes not walk straight home, not come right home and do her homework like she was supposed to do. They would go out for a coffee, and he would let her drink some of her coffee. And she used to say, oh man, don't tell my mom, she'll be so mad. And they'd be walking in the street sometimes, and he'd light up a cigarette and give her a puff, and she would choke, and then they both laugh, you know, and he would say, well, I won't say anything if you won't. So, you know, they had this kind of secret thing going on, right? Anyway, the weather got warm, and the walks home were great, but soon it got hot, and they were thinking, well, you know, we might as well go to the pool. So they started going to the local pool, but after a couple of times, Frank said, you know, the changing rooms are kind of dirty, so maybe what we should do is change at home, and then we'll only have to change once. So that's what they did. They would change at home and then go to the pool. Now, Frank was a very, very talkative guy, and when they would be changing, he would walk from his room into her room, changing and talking. You know, she'd be changing, and he'd walk in, and she would be kind of embarrassed, and he would say, Jenny, man, don't worry about it, because, like, we're family, right? She thought, yeah, I guess this is what families do. Anyway, it was fine. One day he came in, and we were talking, you know, as usual, and he just kind of stopped in front of her, and he looked at her, and he stared at her, and he said, Jenny, you are growing up to be one beautiful woman. Your mom better watch out because she's going to be jealous. Oh, Jenny, you know, she's all embarrassed and everything. Anyway, another time he was changing, he came into the room, and he, you know, kind of looked at her again and walked up to her, and he tilted her chin, and he gave her this sweet little kiss on the mouth. And she's all embarrassed, but he said, you know, I think I'm falling in love with you, girl. She didn't know if she should take it seriously or not. I mean, after all, she's a little girl, you know, and it was her mom's boyfriend, but, you know, it was kind of playful, so she didn't really worry about it. Next time he came into the room, he marched right up to her. He took her and gave her a kiss with his tongue in her mouth, and he cupped her breast, and this time Jenny just froze. And she said, oh, Frank, we're going to be late for the pool. Maybe we better get going, eh? So they went to the pool. And Jenny was really upset because, I mean, she knew this wasn't right somehow. And she went to the nearest payphone. She didn't have a cell. So she called her mom at the hospital. She said, Mom, you got to come home. She said, what? What's the matter, Jenny? Are you sick or something? She said, no, I'm not sick, but Mom, I need you to come home. Well, Jenny, what's the matter? I can't just leave my job like that. You know that. Mom, I need you to come home. Mom, if I didn't need you to come home, I wouldn't be calling, right? I need you, please, Mom. Okay, but it better be good. Anyway, she came home. Frank had gone out for a smoke. And she told her everything. She told her about not doing her homework when she was supposed to. She told her about the coffee. She told her about the cigarette. She told her about the first kiss. She told her about the second kiss. She told her everything. Well, Jenny's mom was so astonished, but soon it was just sadness. You could see in her face that she felt so bad for her daughter. She took her in her arms. She said, Jenny, honey, it wasn't your fault. He should never have done these things. That's wrong, and it's illegal. Jenny, we have to call the police. Mom, don't call the police. I don't want to get Frank into trouble. She said, honey, Frank got himself into trouble. So she called the police. And the police came, very nice officers, and they didn't come in a police car or anything. They interviewed Jenny. They videotaped it so that she wouldn't have to tell her story a million times over, right? And then they said to her, you know, we're going to help you. Well, the first thing they did was, as soon as Frank came home, they arrested him. Jenny was feeling bad, but at the same time, she knew that they'd done the right thing. Well, when they arrested Frank, they went to the computer and they checked and found out that he had done this kind of stuff and worse in 3 other provinces, and he'd somehow slipped out of it. Well, he didn't get away with it this time. I guess you want to know what happened to Jenny, eh? Jenny was feeling pretty bad about the whole thing, but she started going to a group of other kids that this had happened to, this kind of stuff and other stuff, and they all talked about it, and she started to feel better and didn't blame herself so much. Jenny's mom went to a group of parents whose children had gone through this kind of thing and worse, and she learned how to protect her daughter better. So there are some things that I want you to remember. What happened here wasn't your fault. If this happens to you, it is definitely not your fault. It is never the child's fault. You need to trust your feelings. If it doesn't feel right, it probably isn't. You need to tell someone whom you trust and someone you know is going to be able to help you. And this thing about secrets, you know how they say, don't tell, but it's not your secret. It's their secret. So it is important to tell the secret and just get this off your back.